Hello, wonderful teachers out there. Thanks for joining us. I hope you've been tuning into some of these fun little episodes that we've been doing. This is an effort to spread around some of the talents and knowledge and wisdom that our teachers possess in the classroom. This month, we've been focusing on what to do with students when you're at that very end of the year, a little bit, trying to keep things interactive and rigorous, engaging, and then even that word real world. So I am joined today by a fantastic teacher of our district from East, Dr. Caroline Way. Thanks for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Okay, and so Dr. Way I've known for a while in her mostly 12th grade capacity of working at East. And when you work with 12th graders, talk about real world, it gets real fast. And over the years, I've watched her kind of think through some ways to make class a little bit more interactive and using project-based learning. So she's with us today. Why don't we just start off, Dr. Way? Can you give us just kind of a rough definition when we use those three words, project-based learning, and we put them all together? What are we really saying?
So for me, I think project-based learning is it is a project, but it's more than that, right? It's a way of interacting with your students. And I think of it as a way of making your students a little bit more independent, giving them those 21st century skills, making them more critical thinkers, because they have to take on the weight of that project on themselves rather than having the teacher lead them through it. You're still doing a lot of leading, but hopefully if you're doing it well, hopefully the students are doing some leading as well.
Gotcha. So they've vested in something that they came up with. How do you structure that so they get a chance to choose?
Yeah, so voice and choice is a really big part of it, and for teachers who struggle with choice, like giving options to students, I always say voice is not nothing either. I mean, right? Give them, if you can't give them choice, give them voice. But I usually try to give them like maybe three options for maybe what the final product looks like, or maybe the pathway they want to use to get to that final product, or maybe it's the topic. Um, so you can't, if you give too many choices, you tend to get chaos.
Hmm.
And it tends to be too overwhelming for the students. But
Hmm.
if you give them, like, I would say maybe in the neighborhood of 2 to 5 choices for how they want their project to develop or what they want it to be, that tends to
Hmm.
be pretty successful. And then you can kind of manage that chaos as well.
Fantastic. Okay, so that's some wisdom coming straight from the beginning of really lots of choice. And choice doesn't always mean like everything. That's a very good point. It could be a small part or how you decide to work through the topic. It could be the topic itself. But you're right. Paralysis occurs when there's way too many choices and chaos of never making it anywhere and getting any progress. So it is a challenging thing to give students this bulk of time. And like you said, be on the side a little bit more than we usually are and have some guidelines, but some check-ins along the way. Tell us a little bit about the podcast project, because I know that's something you've developed over a couple, 3 or 4 years. I love
Yeah.
podcasts. I listen all the time. How does that project start off, and what does it turn into?
Well, I love podcasts too. And that's one of the reasons I decided to do it. I'm a big true crime person. So I love podcasts. I listen all the time. And so in terms of well, I'll go back through what is it, and then I'll kind of talk about the process. So it's been a couple of different things over the past couple of years. And I think, by the way, if you're a teacher forming PBL units, I think that's totally normal that each year they sort of develop and transform. And each year you should be thinking about, gosh, how well is this working? What do I want to tweak about it next year?
Hmm.
Um, so the first year I did it, I had envisioned them doing a sort of monologue style podcast where they research a topic and then they they record themselves talking their way through that topic. And so then this year I decided I'd really rather them to do it more interview style, where they pick someone to interview. They still researched a topic and then they went and they found someone to interview about that topic, kind of as a way of like, okay, I've looked at my paper or digital resources, and now I'm going to go find a real life resource, somebody I can talk to and
Hmm.
ask informed questions of, because I've done my research already. And
Okay, let
so
me let
that's
me ask you a question
yeah.
right there, because then you said they. I'm
Mhm.
noticing that one of the other elements of PBL is that you work in a team.
Yes.
So how did that come to be once you gave these options? How did you assign teams? Did teams kind of naturally gravitate
No.
together, or how
Yeah.
does that work?
Okay, so actually, I have not done this podcast as a team or group assignment. And that is one way, because I teach seniors, I have found that group work is really great. But group assignments tend to get completely messy. And that's just my personal style as a teacher. I don't think that that has to be the case for all teachers. So, what I had them do was really try to do this solo. But then with the one that we did this year with the interview, they naturally gravitated towards wanting to interview one another for,
Mm,
especially when they picked certain topics over others.
cool.
I should also say that the when I gave them options for their, like, the voice and choice element for their topic, I really gave them a lot of leeway, but the main idea was that they had to pick an inquiry based on a problem in their community or affecting their community that they would like to solve.
Hmm.
So, for example, I had some students talk about like fights in the hallways, or I had students talk about litter on the street in their neighborhood. And so, actually, I think it kind of was fun in the sense that, like, they found out that experts weren't necessary in those issues, weren't necessarily, doctors and lawyers and scientists. They were each other.
Hmm.
Sometimes that was not always the case. Some people picked more academic topics and they wouldn't talk to a teacher about them.
Hmm.
Um, but in large part, a lot of them picked very kind of practical problems, or problems that were always affecting their community, and so then their peers became really good resources for that. So it became much more collaborative,
Hmm.
and that's what I wanted to happen by turning it from a monologue project into a dialogue project.
Very
That
good.
was one tweak that I made that I felt was a really big improvement. It did make it trickier to coordinate, for
Hmm.
sure,
Hmm.
and they had to do more work outside of class. But I think it was worth it because they had some really nice conversations with one another, and it became, like I said, a more collaborative one.
Very cool. And so that took some thought about changing the dynamic a little bit each year and getting it to be even more collaborative. Do you have some ideas to go even further with the collaboration? Like, could there be
Yeah.
teams in the future?
I think, okay, so I do think the way to go with this project now that I'm really honing in on it is, and I'm scaring myself by saying this, but I think it might be group, because then, okay, let's say that you have 4 or 5 people, then you can really schedule recording times
Hmm.
and have it be a little bit less, like, you're not scheduling a recording time for each student. You're
Hmm.
scheduling a recording time for, like, maybe, I don't know, like a sixth of the class, right? So I
Hmm.
think that might make it more of a doable project where there's less homework outside of class, where students may not have internet access. And that's the hardest part of this project, by the way. It's not the students or scaffolding the learning. It is literally the logistical issues of how do you record this? How do you
Yeah. Setting it
get
up and having the right
together?
time and having
Yes,
people be available. Exactly
yes,
like what we're doing right now in some ways.
yes,
That's, yeah,
exactly.
it takes professional practice and courtesy and all these real world things that you do when you set up with your interview subjects. And so
Flexibility.
that's really neat. And then, public speaking, plus, all students don't like the same skills, or all students also don't, not just like adults, don't necessarily want to contribute the same way to a group project. And I love that idea, like the notion of constructivism, that everybody might bring something different to the group. So
Right.
did you find that other skills came out? Did you see some artists? Did you see some kind
Yeah.
of, born speakers? Did you see any other surprises? Could you
I
tell us
did.
about a couple of those?
Yeah. So a lot of the surprises came in the topics people picked and why they were passionate about them, why they chose them, how they wanted to research them. Those were really, really interesting. And we did this last fall, so I'm like struggling to remember exactly what
Yeah,
those
it's been a little while,
were.
sure.
It's been a minute. Um, but I found out a lot. I learned a lot about my students and what they're passionate about. Um, and then surprises in terms of, yeah, there were some people I didn't expect to have really amazing interview skills. And some people were really good interviewers. Other people turned out to be really good interviewees. And that was tricky because then how do you reward those people?
Yeah.
You're technically grading the interviewer, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I did take that into consideration. If somebody had been interviewed by like 5 people and they did a really great job with that, you can kind of, there are ways to give bonus points.
Okay.
Um,
So
yeah,
the engagement level, did you feel like it was also more intrinsic as it went on? Like they really felt kind of ownership and pride in how well they did?
I did find that. Now, of course, you're always going to get, with seniors, you have a little bit of senioritis. You're always going to get a few people who are like, I'm checking the box here. But for the most part, I felt like they were really they did take a lot of ownership of it. Part of that is because of something that I think makes PBL not just projects, but PBL, which is a public product.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the reason I wanted to do this as a podcast was because I wanted it to be shared. So when we have this party kind of towards the end of the, or at the end of the project, people can watch or listen to each other's podcasts. And that was part of the way that you get buy-in, right? Is making sure that like, this isn't just something I'm turning into the teacher and that she is going to watch. This is something my peers can see, something they might learn from. And that really created a lot of buy-in.
And then being a teacher that did it many years myself, I know the power of having last year's product ready to queue up at the beginning of the next year's product to kind of light the fire and show examples. And then it's so special to show like the voices of your last year students. And then you can be so moved, or you kind of in the moment of remembering these students. And then I think they would long to have the same effect on their teacher. You know, like when we look back and we show, look at these awesome examples. So if you're listening, teachers, that really is the greatest part about doing it multiple years, is you kind of harvest some things from the past that would be great starting points. And there's nothing more motivational than seeing another student, you know, vested, not just the teacher modeling and the, you know, examples and the directions. Like if I can show you a really finished, polished example and tell you why it was such a good example, then really we start from kind of a different, you know, like from a green light go vantage point. And I think the energy level changes and the excitement changes. So
yeah, and the more kind of the more recent those examples are, the better, because a lot of times, especially with seniors, they knew last year's seniors, they looked up to last year's seniors, and so then their project is
this it's entertaining in a cool way. You're like, I know that guy. Yeah.
Did another project where we did a like a Google, like an ebook autobiography. That was the one we did this after the podcast, and that was cool because I could just open up our library and I can be like, whose book do you guys want to see? And we could kind of go through and just, they could pick their friends from, you know, that they knew from last year. And we could go look at how they did. And that was really fun because they got to see how you could personalize those books. It was really a publishing kind of project.
Very cool. Well, yeah, I know you've been dabbling in always creating and always thinking and always structuring it. How about, I'm thinking for these teachers that feel a little bit apprehensive about it, what did it take to like get you to go over the edge, or did you help yourself by discovering that you would maybe help somebody starting new?
Yeah, so I think and I actually, it helps that I led gosh, was it last fall or the fall before? Anyway, led like a little workshop of teachers who are interested in PBL and wanted to learn more about it. One thing that I think is really important to just internally know about PBL is there are a few things that teachers say. Like when I started that seminar, I asked them like, have you tried PBL stuff before? What about it frustrated you? What did you like about it? And they would say things like, well, my students just had a lot of questions, so I felt like I was doing it wrong, or it felt complicated, or it got a little messy in the middle. And I one of the things I told them was, none of those things mean that it's going badly. In fact, all of those things usually mean that it's going well.
Wheels are spinning. Yeah.
Yeah, you want your students to ask a lot of questions, even if they're questions you don't think are important, like they're missing the point, but they are asking you questions, right? Their wheels are turning and they see it as their responsibility to ask those questions, right? That's a win.
That's very wise. Yeah.
And then you can steer them into the questions you really want them to ask, right?
Or everyone's asking the same thing. We stop and we have a discussion about like, this is really something everybody is asking. Let's nail this so that you guys can move on.
That catch moment. And then at the very, very least, you are honing that project for future people. Like even if the questions are, you know, you don't feel like it's productive, but it's helping you. Usually it's helping them be the kind of people who would ask questions and try to figure out how to do this well.
Yeah. And we're taskmasters. I'm sorry, I mean, we're grown-ups. We have 5 million things we do a day. We get them done by the end of the day on our own decision of how to do that sometimes, right? And we forget that young people haven't had this like challenge laid out in front of them, that they have to figure out how to take it apart, figure out how to make progress each day, you know, figure out how to really kind of strategize like that. And that, you know, there's a lot of procrastinators in our world. So how did you deal with that problem, I wonder?
Oh man, if I honestly, if I could like have a one thing that I could snap my fingers to fix, it would be procrastination. So that's really tough. And you know, especially with a project where you have to kind of complete one step in order to get to the next.
Hmm.
There is the pressure of the group that I like to kind of leverage, right?
Hmm.
So there's a few things that I do to kind of combat that. Um, One thing is sort of, you know, the group is going to present on this day, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so then if other people are presenting, but you're not ready yet, it creates this sort of this pressure. The other
Hmm.
thing is know that going in and build that into your calendar. In other
Hmm.
words, have the due date maybe a week or two before the presentation happens. Fill
Hmm.
that and fill that other time with other things, maybe getting your next unit geared up for, and create that critical distance, because then when you have your presentations or your, you know, your reflections, they can
Hmm.
reflect having just a little bit of distance between themselves and that final product, which I always find with my writing is helpful, right? I can't see the flaws until I take a couple of weeks off of it.
Gotcha.
Um,
So
so that
how did you lead them? I'm wondering because I wasn't there. In watching and giving, did students respond back after they heard from their peers? Did they give feedback? And uh,
did.
okay,
Yeah, so it actually I haven't, because I took maternity leave this year, I haven't redone this board.
yeah,
So this is a very old board with old stuff, but they did shout outs to each other about
very
their
cool.
podcast. So this was a logistical challenge, a technological challenge as well. Like how, so the software that I used to have them do the podcast, I found out later was blocked on some of their computers.
Hmm.
So what I ended up doing was allowing them to record on their phones, and then a workaround was that you could either have them log into that website for the ones that it worked for and listen to each other's podcasts that way, or you can post actually a recording on a Padlet.
Hmm.
And that is what I would do next year. I would just have them record on their phone and then upload it to Padlet, because all of those are, you know, under 18-year-old friendly websites, so they
Sure,
wouldn't be blocked.
sure.
So yeah, so they were to get on and listen to each other's podcasts. They were, you know, given the whole period to listen to like 3 4 5 of them, find ones that
Wow.
they liked, and then give
Wow.
a shout out to one of them where they had to be really specific about what they liked about it. And then we did some general reflecting kind of as a whole class about what made our favorites,
Mhm.
and that was really nice
Fantastic.
as well.
And so
Yeah.
that cements that idea that we learn better from each other,
Yeah.
and that the amount of examples that we might see and doing that kind of panorama or gallery walk at the end really helps. Even if a student was like puzzled, there's still some
Yeah.
learning going on, right? There's
Well,
some
and in
light bulb like, oh, if I could do this again.
yes. Yes, and
Right.
that's usually what I ask them. If you could do it again, what would you change, right?
Mhm.
And in fact, the cool thing was there were even giving that padding between deadline and reflection and gallery, right? I still had some students who were not finished with it or hadn't even really started it because they were, I think, kind of paralyzed by like, what does this even look like?
Mhm.
Even though I'd given them examples and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
when they were able to really listen to a bunch of their peers, I think something just clicked. They were like, oh, okay, I can just do this. This is it. And so then they were able to do like finish the project, right? And
Yeah.
they maybe didn't get out of it what everybody else did, but I think they got a lot, and I think they got over that hump of being hesitant about, you know, jumping into it or sharing. I think a lot of our students, what PBL does for them is it forces them to jump in and to
Mhm.
take ownership in a way
Mhm.
that they haven't before, and that they're kind of scared to do, I think, because no one's
Mhm.
asked them to do it before, and it doesn't feel, it feels awkward at first, right? But
And I think if we were to hypothesize, these are skills they'll use in, post-secondary education. They're definitely career type of situations where whatever job you're going to do, somebody's going to be on your team, or you're going to have a group deadline, or right, even have to present sometimes, depending on what your job might be. So, do you think they made connections
yeah,
with
and I
that?
think the thing that all of yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I
No, no,
didn't.
I was just wondering if like some light bulbs went off that they were feeling a little professional, or like they might like this stuff.
Yeah, I think there's definitely those professionalism light bulbs, and also when you kind of remind them like, hey, at a certain point someone's just going to give you a task and expect you to figure out how to do it.
Hmm.
And so this time you have a guide for that, but
Hmm.
next time you may not. And so there's, you know, no matter what your job is or what it involves, that is the kind of the common element that somebody will give you something to do and expect you to just figure out how to do it and solve problems and troubleshoot. And so
Hmm.
they really had to do that with this project. And so this, when you talk about being real world with seniors, you really have to hammer home why what you're doing is useful, or they
Absolutely.
don't want to do it, or they don't see why they're doing it. And so
Yeah.
that
Think
helps with
through it.
this
For
one.
sure. So that's
Right.
that gradual release over the course of their career, where we're like giving them more and more responsibility, and then yeah, but still too much might be like if it's ever been the first time to have all that on your plate, some strange reactions can occur, and
Yeah.
we see it all the time. But then the neat part is you're still here, you're with me,
Yep.
project's still going on. We'll work through this. You know, I know
Yeah.
we can, and just like you're saying, being kind of super supportive and understanding, because I think they're all, instead of us getting mad at them of making no progress, it's
Mhm.
kind of, that wouldn't really work, like that extra anger. I was reading the culturally responsive book. It's like the, oh gosh, we had the perfect words for it. It's not a nurturer, it's the gentle demander. I think
Yes,
it's in
it's
the
a
book.
demander.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
pretty neat.
Right.
I never
Right.
realized that that was even a concept. But yeah, a way that you get more out of your students is to expect great things and then coerce them through it instead of just demand, right?
Right.
Yeah,
But I do think that's where a lot of teachers feel a little bit out of their depth, because they feel like, well, my students seem to be floundering, right? They
yeah,
seem to not know what they're doing. Well, it's new.
yeah,
They don't, but that's
right.
because they're building that skill, and that's what it looks like the first time they're building it. I
Yeah.
think
They're
sometimes
growing. They're not just floundering, they're growing. And I used to call them growing pains and tell my kids that's what those are. Like there used to be a goofy show, but I would always, do you feel that, guys? It's like you're struggling a little bit. You are growing,
yeah,
and like be proud. Like you haven't had to do this much, have you? Or somehow you've escaped all of this challenge, but I
yeah.
don't want you to before you come out of my class because you're going to need this in your future,
Right. And I think yeah, I think we get used to this pattern where we are, we use kind of um common school systems and prompts, but they're very school,
Yeah.
and they're not headed to school. They're
Yeah.
headed out, right? Or some of them go to college, but it's a very different experience, right? And
Yeah.
so you can't do regular school anymore, and
Yeah.
and you really should limit how much you do that anyway. But like when you give someone a worksheet, they know, like they know that schema, they know what to do with that.
Yeah.
But when you
Sit and
give
get,
someone a
right? It's
PBL, they
right. They've
can't do
seen
that
that too
anymore.
long.
Yeah, and so, but I think a lot of teachers then look at that and they're like, "Oh my God, something I'm doing something wrong." You're not doing anything wrong. Your students are
Yeah.
figuring out how to do what
That's
you're asking.
fantastic. I used to tell, again, I'm reflecting hard, but I used to tell them we start learning when we're confused. And like,
Mhm.
so we're going to start on purpose from a point of confusion, ask a whole bunch of questions. That means we don't even know what we're thinking. And then that's where
Mhm.
we're going to start, instead of like, everything. What are you going to research? What are you going to learn about? Like, and then the other crazy thing, kids didn't necessarily know research. You're going to learn something you didn't know.
Mhm.
It could either like change your life or other people's lives. Otherwise, why would you have chosen it?
Yeah,
Like,
and that's one of the things there are several pillars of PBL, like what makes something PBL. But another part of it that I always think about is if I'm not learning something,
hmm
it's probably not going to work out. So I,
hmm
I want to be learning something as I do it, because I should be learning from what my students are telling. They're going to go out, they're going to put their own spin on this. They're going to fill it with their own knowledge and opinions and ideas and with what they find out in their research, and they're going to come back and teach me.
hmm
Um, and if that's not happening, you probably have an issue, or it's probably not PBL, right?
True, true.
Yeah.
And then these are the places they also discover, like, I might be more into the medical field than I realized. And
Yeah.
I like talking about all this terminology. And so before you know it, like that path wasn't really set, but it was started there, and the student looks back 4 years later. Oh, I remember when I was in Mr. Dr. Way's class and I started this report about something that was kind of science geeky related, and I didn't realize I really liked that stuff. And before you
Yeah.
know it, I was majoring in like biochemistry, or something. So
Yeah. This year I have a lot of artists in my classes. I think it's just every year has sort of a flavor to it. And this year I have a lot of artists. So the
mhm,
autobiography project was really cool for them, because I told them, I really want pieces of art and music in your autobiography. They're multimodal and I want them to
yeah,
be like that. So I got a lot of a good feel for students who are really into music or really into art. And that was great to see.
yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, well, Dr. Way has basically showcased some of the finer elements of why you do PBL and some of the attractive reasons about learning about your students, about giving choice, about creating kind of a real world situation and putting them into that before they're away from you, so you can help support them as they, power through, but also find it to be a struggle. the way they deal with each other and kind of connect and relate and create community. So there are so many reasons to try PBL. I think she's done a wonderful job to kind of spell those out for us. Let's finish with one piece of advice you would give someone who's just thinking about getting started. What do they do to just kind of jump in?
So I would say to get started, what I would do is I would look up PBL and I would look at those features of PBL. And what I would say is, you know, I would say even if you think your project is hitting maybe 3 or 4 of them, that's a really good start, or 2 or 3. You're making progress. You will build on it and get those other features. As that the project, the first year you do it, it's going to be great. It's not going to be the ultimate vision of that project.
Right.
Every year, add a component to it.
Right.
So don't feel like you have to bite off more than you can chew. Pick something that sounds fun. Make sure it has, like I said, maybe 3 or 4 of those elements, like voice and choice or public product or challenging question or problem. And make sure you hit 3 or 4 of those aspects really hard. And maybe you struggle a little bit with one of those elements and you're going to build it on in another year. But I would say don't hesitate because it's big and complex. Like just bite off a little bit and then the next year bite off a little bit more. And I think you will have fun. It should be fun. One of the things that I really love about it is that it's not a normal assignment. And my students come in either complacent or disengaged or whatever it is, and then they leave with a very different mentality because I'm not doing normal assignments. And that's really fun. It makes it, you're not going to burn out as quickly. That said, it's more work for the teacher, PBL.
It is.
Right?
It is. So it's kind of a trade.
You're
going to do a little more intensive amount of planning and thinking up front and kind of structuring things more than probably you would ever do.
It is.
But then you create that structure and you let it play out, right? And so you have a lot more energy in the middle of the project to be useful. And plus, the cool part is you kind of already know where you're going.
Yes, and you should know where you're going, right? Like you're helping to get students there. I won't say leading, but like it helps for you kind of know where they're going, and you can help kind of guide them there a little bit, even though they're kind of in the driver's seat.
Very good. Lends itself to lots of different ability levels. Someone that needs to go on and do even more can do so in a project because they can add more flavor or spice, or they have more time to edit. And someone who's working toward getting finished, completion might be a really important goal that we would make sure we want to celebrate, even if it wasn't quite the most polished. Or this might be the first time someone really dug in and made something that they were proud of. So remember, when we give feedback on these projects-based learning efforts, that they're really kind of catalysts and very potentially places people could have got shut down, that hopefully that's not what we're going to do as teachers, is say, see, you never get finished on time or any of that stuff. But thank you. It took more than you realized, didn't you? You put on a strong effort. If you had to do this again, like you said, wouldn't you do it a little differently? So
and always start with a kind of like, what do I see? What is here? And what do I like about what is here? Where are you on the right track? And then it's
for
like
students.
Better if conversation. Because and even if someone got partway through the project, I usually grade them by giving them a grade for every step of the project and then a final grade for the final product, so that like whatever they are able to do, they do get credit for. Because I do have a lot of students who, I won't say a lot, I would say like, a decent portion who don't always finish every single project. And that's, but I do give back on what they did get done, right?
Yes.
And most of them
that's key. And to monitor it as it's building instead of just at the end with this wishful thinking. And we would know if we'd been monitoring that we really weren't there. And it's just like, okay, everybody, I'm ready, and there's crickets or nothing's finished. So very good amount of planning goes into how it's going to get collected, how they're going to feel motivated, and then what the final result will be. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wei, for taking some time to talk PBL. This has been another small episode of Specific Drip, a little cool podcast that we're doing at KCPS. If you would like to come on and talk about a specific skill that you possess, something you've grown to be able to do as a teacher, please let me know. We'll have you on. We'll make a small video. We'll get it out there in the world for everyone to see. So thank you for listening today. Thank you, Dr. Wei, for being our guest, and have a great day, teachers.